This is Make Yourself at Home, a podcast from Bisnow where we talk about the pandemic's impact on real estate and the people that work within it. I'm Miriam Hall. I'm Bisnow's New York reporter. This week, we're speaking with DeBoer, the CEO of the Real Estate Roundtable, a DC-based organisation that represents over 100 real estate companies across the country. Jeffrey, who's testifying before the Senate Banking Committee next week, is one of the industry's most influential lobbyists in the nation's capital. I started by asking him how he's going to approach pushing the real estate agenda after Labor Day in regards to the next coronavirus relief bill, considering the fact Congress will only be in for 1 month before the election, plus an agreement on government funding needs to be reached before September 30 or there'll be a government shutdown.
Well, we will continue to press what we have pressed from day one, which is help for struggling Americans and struggling American businesses that have been negatively impacted by the virus. Frankly, it may seem odd, and it may seem like I'm saying two different things, but on the one hand, Congress and the administration have acted quite boldly and quite deeply and quite quickly to provide the relief that they've done so far. And without that relief, I think the economic situation would be much, much worse than it is today. Having said that, is that enough, or should there be more help from Washington to troubled businesses and people? And the answer, obviously, is yes, there should be. And so, the question is how much more, in what areas, and what's the timing of that? They're competing concerns and competing politics, frankly, of who wants to accomplish something or not accomplish something. But, how will they get it done? Well, they work best with their back up against the wall, and so I'm anticipating that something will be done. Advocacy continues, the policy and the politics conflicts continue, and we just have to realize those are realities and go forward and try to come up with as thoughtful and meaningful policy as possible, working with members of Congress.
Let's get specific if you can. Realistically, what are you hoping to get out of this next bill when and if it comes together? I know that there were elements of the PPP loan program you didn't like, and like many in real estate, you favour rental assistance over eviction moratoriums. What's your hope for this next agreement?
Well, again, I hope that more assistance can be provided. Let's talk on the individual side. That I'm hopeful that we can find a way to continue federal support for the millions of people who have lost their jobs due to COVID.
So in the unemployment checks, is that what you mean?
Unemployment checks, yes.
$600,
very helpful.
Is that
well, some amount definitely needs to be provided. The PPP itself was in many ways an unemployment program because the funds went to small businesses who were then strongly encouraged to spend that money on payroll, even though people weren't working. And so, there's a variety of things that Congress has done and the administration have done to help those who lost their jobs. And the idea originally was that assistance would be there as a bridge to the time when the economy returned and jobs returned. Clearly, that's not the case. The bridge got people several months, across the canyon, if you want to say it that way. But the canyon is still out of reach for so many people. And so we will continue to support those programs that help people who have lost their jobs so that they can continue to take care of their families and meet their basic obligations. We will also be suggesting that a more robust rental assistance program should be set up where individuals and businesses who can demonstrate that the COVID situation has either cost them their job or they have had a dramatic decline in their income if they're a business because of this. And those troubled, impacted businesses and people should be able to access a rental fund, which is something that we're suggesting be set up. We're also advocating that, and we know that businesses, small and large, are going to be and are already spending significant sums in terms of keeping their buildings and facilities as healthy and welcoming as possible for a returning workforce. Those expenses are quite high, and we're urging that there be a temporary tax credit or tax deduction or something that would help mitigate the expenses. We're also supporting some roadmap on liability protection because, as we know, people don't really know exactly what they should be doing or shouldn't be doing in terms of a healthy environment for people that they come in contact with in their businesses. And if people don't know what they should be doing, and they're afraid that if they don't do the right thing, they'll be sued, then a lot of times businesses might not do anything and might not reopen. And so we're urging that there be some sort of temporary roadmap or shield or guidelines or something that would basically say that if a business is following these rules and doing these things, it's not opening itself up to being sued by someone who does get sick.
So like an office opening up, they know that they can't be sued by an employee or a shop opening its doors.
I mean, what is a reasonable thing that you're supposed to be doing as a business owner? If you do those reasonable things, but you don't do the extraordinary thing, whatever that might be, perhaps you shouldn't be sued for that. Just like in normal cases, if you're undertaking the normal precautions to protect people, you're typically not opening yourself up for liability. It is only when you engage in negligence or gross negligence or some other willful misconduct that you're liable to be sued on these occasions. But in this situation, people do not really know what is a reasonable thing to do and what isn't a reasonable thing to do. And so we need some protections there. And it's not just real estate owners. This applies to schools and hospitals and colleges and universities and almost in transportation, the airline industry, the subways. Everyone needs to know what is expected of them. And if we know what's expected of us, we will do it. And then we don't expect to be sued for not doing something that wasn't expected of us. So liability protection, some assistance in keeping facilities clean and healthy, some more assistance and continued assistance to businesses and people who have been harmed in this situation is warranted. And by the way, very few people disagree with the general things of what I'm saying here. Some of the details that people can pick apart and find problems with, but in general, those themes are themes that Democrats, Republicans, people in Congress, and people at the administration generally are adhering to.
So you still don't support moratoriums on evictions, right? But there is actually a federal moratorium on evictions in place that was announced today until the end of the year for renters who've been affected by the pandemic. So your hope that eviction moratoriums will not extend is officially dead, is it not? What does that mean for you? I mean, what are you going to push now, considering that announcement?
Well, it's not that we have been, let me put it to you this way. We don't support an eviction moratorium in general. People should meet their obligations, and if they don't meet their obligations, then there is a penalty for that, just like you have to pay for your shoes at a store when you buy them. You don't just walk out with them. You have a obligation to pay for them. On the other hand, this is a very unusual circumstance, and I think that landlords all across the country understand that people are in trouble. And my information is that most landlords, the vast majority of landlords, are working with their tenants on restructuring their rent payments and so forth, and are not looking to evict people. That is not the desire of any building owner. Some of the earlier eviction moratoriums were eviction moratoriums that applied to all residents, not just those that were impacted by COVID. And so you had a situation that was quite disturbing, really, to the industry, which is basically if there's a moratorium on evictions, then why pay your rent? And so we have been urging, if there is going to be a moratorium on evictions, there should certainly be a requirement that the moratorium only apply to those residents who have been impacted and can demonstrate that they are in economic problems because of the virus. And it should not apply to you or I or other people who are in the same situation that we always were in terms of our income. And so that is basically what the executive order yesterday said.
Okay, so you're happy with the executive order of yesterday?
Well, I'm not happy with it. I'm not happy with it. I think that
you're
going
to rail against it.
No, I believe that. Well, we don't rail anyway, but we think that it makes much more sense if you're going to have a moratorium on enforcing a private contract, and that's what a lease is, a private contract. If all of a sudden the federal government is going to come in and say, we don't enforce those contracts anymore, at a minimum, that rule should only apply to people who have been impacted by the virus, and that is what the executive order does. Part two, though, it's not a long-term solution to the problem. You can have moratoriums on evictions all you want, but it does not solve the basic problem. And so part two is the need to establish a rent assistance program. There should be if there is a moratorium on eviction, there should also be an attempt by the federal government to provide assistance to renters who are out there who can't pay their rent. And so there's two sides of the problem. And again, moratoriums on evictions, all it does is rack up it's not like you don't have to pay the rent. It just means you don't pay the rent during the moratorium. And at some point in time, the moratorium ends, at which point these people will have a large slug of rent that is due. And most people will not be able to pay that rent. The problems of the health crisis need to be socialized.
Is there anyone putting together a rental assistance program that you think is going to work? Do you like?
Well, in the House bill that passed in summertime, in late June, I believe, the so-called HEROES Act, there's a $175 billion residential renter assistance fund in that bill that passed the House of Representatives. A similar proposal to that part of the bill is advancing in the Senate. It's got about 30 or 35 senators on it in the Senate, and it probably would work. I mean, it's certainly a good effort, and it just simply needs to be expended on the business side. And eligibility requirements, who would get this, all that kind of stuff, are details that would need to be worked out. But it's certainly in the air. And by the way, yesterday afternoon, after the executive order on the moratorium on evictions came out, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, basically said in many ways, in her own way, what I just said, which is moratorium on evicting people who have economic problems due to COVID is a good thing. Okay, fine. But it does not long-term solve the problem. We need rental assistance. And so, there's a lot of agreement around the general goal here, I would say.
You said that you said broadly that everyone has the kind of same goals and same ideas, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. But Pelosi has said that both sides are miles apart on values and they're miles apart on money. I mean, the Democrats are talking about $2 trillion as the lowest amount they will accept. When you take the meetings and you have the calls, socially distanced, of course, what do you tell people in terms of kind of bringing these two things together, these two sides together?
Again, I think that there is broad agreement that cities and states need more help. I think there's broad agreement that schools need help. I think there's broad agreement that troubled individuals who have lost their jobs need help, and businesses need help. I think that those things are universally agreed to. The differences are really how much help do each one of those sectors need, who's eligible in each one of those sectors for help, and then after those things are agreed to, then it gets into some of the extraneous things that both sides keep trying to stick on to a bill that is designed just for COVID relief. So when I say things are universally agreed, I'm talking about the principles. They are. But, for example, on state and local assistance, I believe that the president and the Republicans have put maybe 100 or 150 billion on the table, in addition to the 150 that has already been in earlier bills to state and local governments, and Speaker Pelosi is asking for roughly $1 trillion. So, I mean, okay, they both agree to it. The difference is 150 versus $1 trillion. That is not insurmountable a problem to tackle. It's a math problem, basically, and the same goes on in all of these other issue areas. I think that if people would set aside some of their extraneous items, and if they would agree to compromise on their numbers, I think that there could be another bill before the election. I am optimistic on that and hopeful on it. It's certainly needed, and we're certainly supporting the process to get to a point where a positive bill can occur.
Speaking of the election, we're less than 2 months away from it now. Both conventions are done. I believe back in July or so you were predicting Biden would take it. What do you think now as we sit here talking just before Labor Day?
Well, I don't know. I was asked in July, I guess you're referring to a question I received that got some publicity, who would win. And I said, if the election were today, I said that Vice President Biden would win. But I also said the election's not held today, and there's a lot of time between now and then, and we don't know what will happen. So,
what if the election were held today then?
Well, if the election were held today, I think it's a much closer on the result. Now, next week, it might not be. I mean, all I do is look at the polls. Now, will they stay narrow next week or in the following weeks? Will they narrow further? I don't know. But again, if you just looked at the polls in July and you ask a question, who's going to win? Well, I guess the guy ahead is going to win. As the polls have narrowed, you ask the question again and you say, well, it still looks like the guy who was ahead is going to win, but it's narrowing, and I don't know what that means out there, but it means that an arrow is going in one person's direction and against another person's direction. Is that a trend? Is that will continue? Is that an aberration? We don't know. I don't know. It's not my business. I don't know.
I mean, no one can predict, but from what I understand from what you're saying is if it were today, it would be Biden, but it would be close. You're basing that on polls.
Yeah.
Yeah. How has the industry digested Biden's announcements as they've come out recently? I mean, he said he'd drastically change 1031 exchange program, capping it for people who earn $400,000 or less. He's hinted at reforms to opportunity zones. He said he'd reinstate a fair housing policy that Trump has killed. How does the industry kind of view those sorts of policies, announcements, ideas?
Well, I think, I'm not alarmed by it, and I'm not comforted by what anyone else says about it. I think that, laws are laws until they're not laws. And all laws are constantly being reviewed and reformed and sometimes repealed. As debates go forward, we will make our case and as the evidence presents on different issues. And, if in fact, some of these tax rules that you talk about are not beneficial to jobs and beneficial to communities and beneficial to economic growth. If that is indeed the case, then maybe they should be changed. So we have an open mind about all of this. We're not dug in on any of it. But most laws are laws that are in place because there has been a serious review of either an economic situation or a market condition or a product condition that needs to either be stimulated or penalized. And most of these things are in law for a particular reason. And sometimes the reason may have changed, but most times it hasn't. So we'll look forward to those discussions when and if they occur.
If Biden did win, it would be a bit of a change for the industry, wouldn't it? I mean, going from having a real estate man in the White House. I know you say that you can only go off polls, but you have some greater insight into what people are talking about. Give me a sense of that, about what real estate people are saying when they're not talking to reporters, about what they want or who they want, who they think they should win. Like, what are they saying kind of, typically we'd say around the water cooler, but obviously that's not happening right now. But, what are the discussions what are you hearing from people? Lift the lid a little bit for us.
Well, I think that everyone needs to step back and realize that people in the real estate business are, first of all, people. And like all people, they all have different points of view and different things drive them to support different parties and different candidates. And so around the water cooler with real estate CEOs is really not much different than being around the water cooler with any subgroup of Americans. And some would be expressing dismay at policies that the president has promoted, and some would express dismay at the policies that are being talked about by the vice president running for president. And some would be hyperbolic about being concerned about this little issue or that little issue, and it's no different. It's really no different than what people will hear or you would hear from any group of clear-eyed people out there. It's not so. In other words, I would not say that the industry is cheering on one side or the other. I think that the industry is reflective of the overall electorate out there, and some are cheering on one side and some are cheering on the other side. And at the end of the game, in this case an election, we will work with whoever it is and whichever party is in control to try and make sure that the policies that apply to real estate are as reasonable and responsible over the long term as possible. And we will be supportive of other economic policies, broader policies that we think will bolster job growth and the economy. And then finally, I do want to say that we, and maybe this is something that we didn't do before as much as we should have, and we are doing it now and intend to do it going forward, and that is making sure that what we're advocating or talking about is also provides opportunities and open opportunities for minorities, people of color, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses. And so not just a policy that should be pursued because it's a good policy, but what does that policy mean for those who might need a little bigger boost in terms of having opportunities to grow their business or to develop a business or something like that. And all of these things are almost irrelevant to who's in the White House.